Now, the Brewster Buffalo, a funny looking little radial powered US Navy fighter aircraft that was heavily exported, is considered by a lot of people to be one of the worst fighters of World War II, unless in the hands of one particular country. But we're not here to talk about the history of the Buffalo. Instead, I highly recommend, if you want to know more, to check out a good friend of mine, Chris, better known as Rex from Rex's Hangar. He has done a video on the history of the Buffalo, so go check that one out if you're curious. No, in this video, we're going to be having a look at 3 models of the Buffalo in 1/72nd scale, and deciding out of the 3 kits, which is the best of the worst. So we'll start off with the Airfix Buffalo, and as you can see on the box, although you also get a Williams Jeep, which would make a very cool airfield diorama, when they designed this kit, whoever was doing it must have been completely fucking high, because this doesn't even look like a Buffalo. I mean, come on, it looks like some sort of weird tank thing. It doesn't even look like a plane. Wait a minute, what? Alright, that's looking a little bit better. So, the Airfix Brewster Buffalo was recently reissued last year as part of their Vintage Classic range, although the original kit dates back to the late to mid-70s. Starting out, having a look at the box, we have a Brewster Buffalo in a Royal Air Force scheme with the brown and the green flying through some clouds. It's got a little bit of damage on the tail there, and you can see it's firing its guns, and a Zero is flying past with a bit of smoke trailing, so some beautiful classic Roy Cross artwork there. Nothing too much on the sides, other than a few warnings, repeat of the Boxer on the ends, and then on the top we have the standard Airfix layout with a little bit of a brief history on the aircraft and some details about the tooling, so 1972, and then you also have the 2 schemes included in this kit, along with the flying hours, not that they're much use to an Australian like me, and the Humbrol colour codes. Nothing on the back side of the box, so we'll move on to the instructions. They come in the usual Airfix format with a bit of history, going in a little bit more depth than what's on the side of the box. In this kit, they're in the fold-out format, which I'm not a huge fan of, but luckily there's not too many steps, since this is quite an old kit. In fact, there are only 5 of them. So assembly begins with the upper wings getting joined to the lower wings and also a bit of the fuselage half, along with what exists of the cockpit, which is a chair, a pilot, and a little bit of flooring. And then finally you put in the observation window. Step 2 sees the fuselage halves getting joined after you've put in the tail hook, the life raft holder, and also the scope for Scheme B. And there's 2 elevator halves which come as single pieces. It's a bit odd that they've included the life raft and the carrier hook, however they have not said to leave it out for Scheme A, which is the land-based version, which would not have had these. But for some reason they've included that only option B has the sight, so a little bit odd there. Step 3 is probably the simplest, involving the canopy being installed. You have an option for either the land-based version or the Navy version, which has a hole cut out for the sight, and then you join the wings to the fuselage. Step 4 consists of installing an antenna along with the engine cowling and the engine itself. The engine consists of a single piece with the piston and engine details with a little hole in it for the propeller to fit through. There's then a washer that holds the propeller in place, so if you assemble it correctly it will spin, and a little spinner cowling cover for the front of the propeller blades. You then build around this the sides for the engine and also a front piece for the cowling. Finally, you have step 5, which is the landing gear, which consists of a main strut along with a supporting frame, then the landing gear bay doors, and a wheel with a little washer. I suppose theoretically you could have the main wheel spin, but it wouldn't probably add too much really to the model. There's also an option for either a smaller tail wheel or a larger one, which looks a little bit generic, especially compared to the other Buffaloes, which you'll see later. The 2 schemes then have their own painting guide, which are done quite nicely in colour. One for a number 67 Squadron Royal Air Force aircraft from Rangoon in Burma, part of early 1942. And then you have a second, more colourful option, a US Navy Fighter Squadron aircraft from VF2 on the USS Lexington, and its 3rd section leader. It's got the very, very vibrant interwar US Navy colours with the yellow wings and a blue cowling and an even brighter yellow tail and a silver body, so that looks really quite nice. Good to have a little bit of variety in the choices there. Moving on to the exciting plastic parts inside of this box, you have 5 grey sprues, which is quite a large number for such a small aircraft, but some of these sprues only have 1 part on them. One such sprue contains the fuselage, which as you can see here shows the standard for this kit. It's of its time with raised rivet lines and a few raised panel lines, but some very nice fabric texturing and some recessed details around the rudder. On the inside there isn't really, other than a few ejector pin marks, so very basic, but at least that sprue is relatively clean. We have another sprue with the other fuselage half, which is a very similar affair, along with some other details, such as a pretty nice pilot figure, some very generic looking tail wheels with a bit of flash on them, some small pins and the sight for the Navy version along with the engine. The engine has some nice detail, although there is quite a lot of imperfections and flashing around it. The wheels also have a lot of flashing and are quite basic in general. The tail hook looks pretty good, along with some of the landing gear struts, and here you can see the cockpit floor and a little bit of nice detailing on the life raft holder. As you can see, they've included the headrest as a single piece, so you can't really separate it, hence why they probably include it as part of both the Navy and the land version. No detailing on the cockpit floor, there's only a few nasty ejector pin marks and also a small pindle for the seat to fit to. The elevators are similar to the fuselage with raised details and a lot of riveting, although the fabric texture once again looks quite nice, and they have done recessed detailing for the trim tab and the elevators itself. The wings come on a single sprue, or at least the upper wings. Again, much like the fuselage half, there is a lot of raised rivets, and oddly they have one recessed panel line, and the elevators, or the ailerons I should say, are recessed, but the rest of the details are all raised, so a little bit basic. On the underside there is a little bit of raised riveting for the flaps and some fabric texturing on the ailerons. The underside comes on a separate sprue, and as you can see they've moulded the landing gear bays and the underside of the fuselage. They're all pretty basic. Again, it's all raised rivet lines and raised panel lines, but not too bad. The final sprue we have here contains the landing gear and the engines. Oddly, there's two sets of landing gear. I believe one is for when the gear is extended and the other is retracted, but the instructions did not specify, and I could only get this by looking at other people's videos on this particular kit. As for the propeller, as you can see, part of my propeller blade did not come moulded with the kit. I did think about contacting Airfix because I have heard their spares reputation is pretty good, although I thought it would take forever for it to come out to Australia, so as you'll see I found a workaround. As for the engine details that remain and the seat, they're all pretty basic. There's a little bit of raised detailing on the sides of the engine cowling, but otherwise nothing too fancy. A little bit of recessed details around the engine cowling itself, but nothing too deep, and it all looks a little bit weak. The final sprue in terms of the rest of the kit is the clear frames, and these are probably the best sprue yet. I suspect that they were probably redone, but as you can see the quality on them is really fantastic. Even in some of the most curved parts they don't really distort, they're perfectly transparent and there are very few scratches. All of the details or the frames on them are raised, and so that makes it very easy to paint by hand as I like to, or theoretically I suppose to mask it up would be pretty easy as well. So pretty good for the clear parts, definitely the best part in this entire kit. But don't get ahead of ourselves, there's also the decals, and in true Airfix form they're printed by Cartograph, so a brilliant remastering of these schemes, which I believe have been used in previous editions of this kit. As you can see, the quality of them is standard Cartograph, so absolutely fantastic. If I zoom in here you can see just how fine the details are on them. And the quality of the decals are going to be very good, as like I've said, they're Cartograph, so big tick for the decals, and they will look pretty nice, I reckon, if you do that vibrant scheme especially. Those blue lines look quite good, as long as they fit the rest of the aircraft. So that's the Airfix Buffalo. We'll move on to the Hasegawa one. I just want to say at this point to subscribe to the channel if you haven't, of course, but also that when I was filming the Airfix segment for this video, I actually didn't speak as I was looking at the kit. Instead, I've actually done a voiceover later. The reason I did it this way is because I actually wanted to build the Airfix Buffalo when I was a bit sick. I'd had about 3 days or so where I couldn't even get out of bed, and when I finally did get out of bed, my brain was just like, there was nothing really there. So I decided I wanted to build this kit because I thought it would be nice and easy for my brain to do while I was feeling unwell. That is why I actually did a video of the box and the sprues before I could speak, so I did the voiceover later. But anyways, without further ado, let's have a look at the Hasegawa one and see how it compares. So Hasegawa has reissued this kit many times in quite a fair few number of different forms. This particular set is a combo, so it's got 2 kits and 2 sets of markings, and it focuses on the early F2A1 and the F2A2 variant of the Buffalo in the US Navy service. So as you can see on the front here, we've got two Buffaloes in the sort of early war or pre-war silver with some very bright, colourful markings on them, which is always fun to do in my opinion. On the side here, got a few warnings and that in various languages, and just a repeat of the markings we see on the front, on the sides there, and nothing on the back. So a pretty simple box. Now, I got this one second-hand, but everything was all sealed up and all the parts were included. But I've since actually opened it up to have a little bit more of a closer look. So we'll only really need to look at one set of sprues for each of these, although two sets are included, as you can see. But we'll start off with the instructions first. So you get two sets of instructions for the aircraft. Both of them are identical as far as I can tell. So you only really need to have a look at one. But first of all, as you can see, it is in the massive fold-out format, which I am not a big fan of, but it's pretty typical. At least with these ones, you can easily enough fold it up a little bit to make it take up a little bit less space. But on the front, we've got a bit of history about the Buffalo, especially in the US Navy service, talking a bit about its early war performance being pretty poor. Otherwise, then you open up, you've got a sprue map here in the corner, which is pretty useful, and it sort of highlights some of the parts you won't be using. They've recycled this tooling quite a fair few times to make different versions of the Buffalo, so I think you can pretty much make the Dash 1, Dash 2, or the Dash 3 version. There's quite a few different bits and pieces, and for some reason you get an extra spare set of blades, which is useful if you need to, for example, I don't know, replace one that's missing on the Airfix kit that you got. But yeah, assembly begins with the interior, which is pretty typical. You've got a fair bit of detailing here for the floor. You've got the fuel tanks and that sort of framing that the seat sits on. Then you've got a set of rudder pedals and the control column. Separate little flat piece for the instrument panel with a decal included, which you glue to the fuselage halves. Doesn't look like there's any sidewalling detail, which is pretty typical for a sort of Hasegawa kit of this time period. But once you've put the cockpit parts into the fuselage, you can join the two halves together. Then you've got the wings here, which come as four pieces with two for each side, an upper and a lower section, which you can join together. Then you can join those to the fuselage half. Looks like there's a bit of detailing for the back there. On the Navy version, you have the little, I believe it was like a life raft, which you put behind the pilot there, but then you've got a bit of that roll cage as well, and looks like the little headrest for the pilot. Little piece here for looks like the tail hook, which shame you can't have it extended if it's just that one little piece, but oh well, you can probably scratch build one if you really wanted the tail hook down. But you've got a little section at the back there for the tail hook to fit into, which you then attach to the rear of the fuselage. Looks like elevators come as a single piece, which you attach as well. You've got to drill out, by the looks of things, the hole for the tail hook, I should mention. Then we've got, I think those would be exhaust pieces, but there's a small little part that fits to the front of the fuselage there, just behind, or just forward of the engine, so I'd suspect that would be exhausts. Then on the underside here, you've got the very small tail wheel at the back there, looks like the US Navy variant. Single piece for the struts there, and then there's a landing gear, or wheel, and a landing gear fairing, which you attach to the strut and then you glue into place there. Looks like they've done some pretty nice detailing for the inside of the wheel well there, which is pretty cool. Separate landing lights on two sides there, and the sort of window for observing below the aircraft is there. They've included a decal for the framework, which is pretty cool, so you could probably leave that out until after you've painted the fuselage and then glue that in and then use the decal, which is awesome. A little pitot tube at the end of the wing there, which you install, and then you've got the front of the aircraft where the engine is. So you've got, looks like 3 sections for that front engine cowling, plus a single piece for the piston cylinder detailing there. Once you've stuck those together, you've then got the actual front of the engine cowling, which you attach. And it looks like there's a 4th piece at the top there for maybe it's an air intake or just an access hatch. Then you've got the propeller, which has a little, I think that's even a poly cap, we'll have to have a look. So similar to the Tamiya kind of kits. Separate propeller blades, which means you can swap them out for, I think, the early or the late propeller. Although I'm not a big fan of having separate propeller blades because it's really hard to line them up. But anyways, you've got 3 separate blades, which you attach to the spinner there, which you then install to the gearbox, and the poly cap holds that in place. And then you've got the front spinner cover there, so that's quite a complex assembly for the propeller, but oh well, at least you've got some nice options and it looks like it'll spin. Then the last thing you've got here is installing the canopy, and you've also got the US Navy scope sight, which you fit on top of the instrument panel there, and you've got a little hole in one of the optional canopy parts for it to fit through. So yeah, as you can see, quite a complex little kit, quite a few little parts, especially around the engine, but the detail looks pretty good. On the back of the instructions here, you've got marking guides. So it looks like you've got options for 2 different aircraft, both from VF3 and from the USS Saratoga. So early, the pre-war 1939 US Navy schemes, so you've got really colourful wings. The painting guide is a bit confusing. I think they used usually Humbrol. So it looks like you've got silver for the fuselage, and then you've got, I'd say it would be yellow or something like that for the wings, although, here we go. Colour guide's just below the sprue map. As you can see, yeah, we've got a few different colours, so you match it up with the code there. What I might do is I might actually get out both sets of instructions, so I've got the paint codes there and the markings. So yeah, it looks like you've got number 4, which is a bit of yellow, so a bit of yellow on the engine cowling, and on the wings you've got number 329, which is yellow. So yep, yellow wings there, and silver bodywork, which is pretty nice and colourful. I'm not sure if I'll end up going with these schemes when I eventually build this kit. I might do a few different ones because I've got a fair few spare decals, but I think I could be definitely tempted to do a silver navy scheme. So as you can see, for such a tiny little aircraft, we've got quite a lot of sprues. We have 6 sprues moulded in the grey plastic, plus a set of clear ones, which are quite large frames, but they're pretty empty on some of them. But we might as well start off with the fuselage halves since I've got it here. So as you can see with this kit, it is all recessed details with a few little raised ones where appropriate. And you can see they've done quite a nice job. You've got all of the panel lines which look to be in good spots. You've got the various access hatches on the side here. Nice bit of raised detailing for the control surfaces, although they probably could have done it a little bit more fabric-y looking. It still looks okay. And yeah, quite a nice detail on a lot of those access hatches there. And there's another little panel at the front here with some rivet detailing, but otherwise it's relatively simple. A little bit of moulded detail for the landing gear bay there, moulded to the fuselage half, so it's a bit of a curious assembly with this kit, but it is a bit of a strange way the landing gear comes up into this plane. And as you can see on the inside, there's no detailing on the fuselage sides, which is a bit of a shame, but at least there's a little hole there to help line up the cockpit assembly. Looks like we've got a little antenna here with a little bit of flash on the end there, but it's alright otherwise. Got a few more parts here. We've got a bit of the framework for the roll cage. Again, there's a tiny bit of flash on some of the parts, but otherwise they're pretty nicely done. This looks like the fuel tank for the inside of the cockpit, plus the cockpit floor there, which I think goes that way. So yeah, pretty basic, but still quite nicely done. Here we've got the joystick, and as you can see, they've done a nice bit of detailing on that, with the control linkages also visible, which is nicely done. Rudder pedals moulded as one piece there for both sides. You can see they've done a little bit of a corrugation or sort of recess on those, which look quite nice, although there are some ejector pin marks that are in visible spots, but they're pretty subtle, and they're probably going to be less visible once the cockpit's all sealed up. Instrument panel, pretty basic. It's sort of just the outline shape. It's relying on the decals for the instrument detailing. Here we've got a basic little seat, which looks quite accurate in sort of a bucket style. Here we've got, I think this is a solid cover for the observation window below the wings, so that's an optional part. I don't think the US Navy ever had it covered up because it made it a bit easier to see when you're landing on the carriers, or if you're doing any attack runs through that window, so that's included. I think maybe the British version used it. Here we've got the basic tail wheel there, which, yeah, they've done a nice job detailing that. They've sort of done a fabric-y texture covering up some of the struts, and then they've done a raised outline for the rubber wheel. Here we've got the elevators, which, as I've said, are moulded as one piece to the horizontal stabilizer. Looks like you've got a difference on each side. You've got some nice recesses for the joints where the elevators meet, and the trim tab, and then some raised details for the fabric. On the underside, you've got access hatches moulded, which look pretty good. For the engine here, you've got some quite nice detail. It's actually a mix of raised and recessed, and as you can see, they've done all the wiring and the detail on the cylinder heads, which look pretty nice. Here we've got the rear tail section with a little bit of raised ribbing and detailing on it, and a bit of recessed stuff, so that looks quite good. And as you can see, you've got a little slot here that you cut out, and you can stick the tail hook into place, which looks pretty good. Then we've got the other fuselage half. It's a similar affair to the other side, a little bit of flash here and there, but otherwise details look pretty good. And here we've got the pitot tube, which looks quite nice. No imperfections or anything on that one, so yeah, looking quite good. On Sprue B here we have the upper half and the lower half of the wings, along with what looks like the landing gear flaps or the bay doors, and part of the exhaust detail, although it's a bit hard to tell. It's a pretty basic little blocky piece here. But as for the wings, they look quite nice. You can see again it's recessed details with some very nice riveting on some areas, and a bit of raised details where appropriate. Such as the walkway here, the markings around that, and a few little ribs and various details on the wings. So yeah, they're looking really quite nicely detailed, quite cleanly molded as well. There's not any flash or imperfections that I can see. You can see on the underside a hole for the landing light. You've got, looks like ejector ports for the shell cases, and a lot of nicely detailed access hatches. So yeah, wings look really quite nicely detailed there. And as you can see on the upper surface, upper wing, you've got a bit of molded ribbing for the interior of the landing gear bay, which looks really quite nice. So yeah, Sprue B looking pretty good there. We've got a few smaller sprues here. We've got Sprue C, which includes the engine cowling details. As you can see, they've done a really nice job doing this with the recesses for the various rivet details. They've done the exhausts or the vents there molded in, which are really quite nice. So yeah, details looking really great, and it's all recessed on the engine cowlings, which look good. Front cowling here, bit of recessed detail for the machine gun outlets there, which look good. And they've fully molded or drilled out the holes for the air intakes, which look really good there. A little bit of detailing on the underside here where the wheel wells are, and yeah, again, really nice recessed riveting. Here we've got the gearbox kind of cover, which has some quite nice detail on it there. That looks pretty accurate for the radial engines. Spinner with, yeah, looks like it's the correct shape there. And here we've got the hub for the propeller, and as you can see, they've got little holes there to help line up the propeller blades. Again, not a big fan of the individual prop blades, but oh well, at least it lets them use this tooling for a few different models of the Buffalo. And there we've got the base of the propeller, which, yeah, nicely done. Not too many imperfections or anything on this sprue to complain about, and the detailing looks really quite good. On this tiny sprue, which is F, we have the US Navy parts, so a separate tail wheel without the fabric covering. Instead, you've actually got the strut detailing, which looks really good. Here we've got the little tube that I think contains the life raft, if I'm not mistaken. Really nicely detailed scope there for the gun sight, which looks quite good. Little headrest or cushion for the pilot, which, yeah, not too badly molded there. And then we've got the part of the tail hook there. Shame it's not the full tail hook, but oh well, it looks quite nicely detailed for the small part that you get there. Then we've got these two sprues here, which are identical. They're both numbered G, and they contain the landing gear and the propeller blades and exhaust. And as you can see, they've done a really nice job molding the struts as a single piece there, quite nicely detailed with a mix of recessed and raised areas. Looks like some ejector pin marks, which might need a bit of a clean up, but oh well, it's not the end of the world. They're worse on the tyre here, which as you can see on the rear part are quite large there. We'll need a little bit of putty to fill that up, unless you can sort of position the wheel to hide it. But on the other side of the wheel, they've done a nice job doing some recessed detailing on the tyres and the hub there. Exhaust, not drilled out, but as you can see, you could probably quite easily drill that out, especially since it's a separate piece here. And then we've got two sets of propeller blades. You've got the later one, which is a little bit thicker, and there's sort of a large bulge here, and the earlier narrow ones. Looking at the instructions, I think it said you only need the narrow ones, but at least you have the option there for the later version. I've actually taken as one of these, because for some reason with the two sprues you end up with 4 propeller blades when you only need 3. But that was kind of useful because that meant I could use that to fix up the Airfix one. The last thing we've got here are the clear parts, and as you can see, they're quite nicely done. There's quite a lot of curves on this particular canopy, and they've done quite a nice job moulding them without too many imperfections. Although it's definitely not the same quality as the Airfix one, which is a bit of a shame. They are still quite nicely done, and you can see they've done a pretty big hole there for the scope sight for the navy version, or you've got the completely covered one for the non-navy version. Done a nice job for the observation window at the bottom there. As you can see with my finger, it's pretty clear. Not too many scratches or anything. And it looks like we've got the landing lights and a tiny gun sight for the non-navy version if you're building a different one. The other thing we've got are 4 poly caps, and yeah, they're of that kind of rubbery texture similar to the Tamiya ones, so I quite like them. They're pretty easy to use. And yeah, you've got 4 of them, so if 2 go missing, you can still finish off the kits, which is nice, or you've got 2 spares afterwards, which are always good to have. So for some reason it appears we've got quite a few spare optional markings. So you've got 2 sets of yellow and 2 sets of green plus black, so I'm not sure if that's for the same schemes or not, but yeah, it's a little bit confusing with Hasegawa, which is pretty typical, but maybe I'll talk a bit more about that when I'm actually building the kit. But as you can see, decals, you've got quite a few ones. You've obviously got sets or enough decals for 2 aircraft, hence why I've got all the roundels there, and since it's the same squadron, you've got the same little black cat running with the little bomb there, which looks pretty cute. Here we've got the instrument decals, so there's 2 there, and they're pretty basic. Then you've got a fair few common markings, which are quite nicely done actually. You can see on the, I think those are for the propeller blades, they're really nicely detailed. All of the fine markings there look pretty good, and you've got a few more little badges and the little prop blade markings, which again look really nicely detailed. And the little Hamilton standard logo for the propeller blades looks quite nice. So yeah, decals look of pretty good quality. I find the Hasegawa ones to be pretty good. Sometimes they go a little bit funny and have a bit of a film on them, but you can easily cover that up with a bit of varnish once you've applied it onto the model. So yeah, decals look pretty good there. So overall, the Hasegawa kit looks really quite awesome. There's quite a lot of optional parts, so you can make different versions of this kit, even if you don't use the markings included. You can still make, say, the Finnish version or the British one, which is cool. Definitely a step above the Airfix one, a massive one, in fact, in terms of the level of detail of just things like the vents and the cockpit being included, which is awesome. Although, shame the clear parts aren't as good a quality, but it is pretty hard, I think, to beat a lot of the Airfix moulding quality. That being said, this is a lot better than their retail Buffalo by most standards, so yeah, pretty excited to have a build of both of these aircraft, and not sure what I'll go with for the schemes, but I'm sure I'll pick something eventually. Yeah, definitely recommend this one if you can get a hold of it. So that is the Hasegawa kit. If you can get one of these for a decent price, I'd highly recommend it. It definitely looks like it's a step above the Airfix one. But now we have the final and most promising contender, the Special Hobbies kit. Now, I actually have 2 of these kits, and neither of them are mine. A friend who I do a little bit of selling of their stash for had these, and I did think about getting them off him, but he decided he wanted them back. But I did ask, hey, can I do a little inbox review and see how it compares to the other 2 kits? And he said, go ahead. So that's why I am able to show you guys a comparison of these 2 kits, which is coming up. And finally, we have 2 kits, both from Special Hobby. One is the Model 339BE Buffalo Mark 1, which is the mainly British land-based Buffaloes, and the F2A3 Buffalo, which is the final version of the Buffalo, and kind of the one that's the least popular because they added a lot more weight in terms of fuel and armor, but the aircraft was still a bit underpowered and it did not perform well at all during the Battle of Midway. So we'll have a look at the Buffalo Mark 1 first, and then sort of compare the differences between the Mark 1 and the A3. So on the front here we've got a Buffalo in the British scheme with the black and the white undersides for recognition, and you can see there's, I think it's a Kai 43.
Are you sure about that?
Japanese fighter. It's clearly over the jungles of Asia, and as it says on the front, the kit contains injected plastic parts, an injected canopy, decals and resin parts, and there's also some RAF markings included since some of these squadrons were Australian. So on the back we've got a repeat of the art, same on the sides really, there's just a few little warnings, nothing too interesting. On the inside here, we have a single plastic bag containing one set of sprues in grey plastic, plus the clear sprues, and then you'll see in there we've got a little bag of resin and the decals. And the instructions are included in this one. Now, with the instructions, it's pretty similar. You've got a little bit of a brief history of the Buffalo series and talking a little bit about its service with Dutch, the British and the Australians, and also a little bit about the American ones, but mainly focusing on the British version, obviously, with this. Opening up, you've got a sprue map here, and there's a lot of parts, as you can see, with the little X's over them that are not going to be used for this particular version of the Buffalo. And you've also got the polyurethane, or I think they mean resin parts, as well as the clear parts sprue there. And it's in a booklet format, which I'm a big fan of. So as you can see, this is the only Buffalo that's got a proper sidewalling detail, and a lot of these parts are actually made out of resin. So you've got a bulkhead here with sidewall detailing on a separate part. Looks like some little part here which is like a shelf. Then you've got the engine, which there's a little bit of detail behind the engine bulkhead, which is interesting. Plus you've got a rear panel there, and it looks like a little bit of internal ribbing inside of the fuselage halves. Then you add the instrument panel, which also has the rudder pedals attached to it, a separate part here for the fuel tank and the rudders, as well as a control stick and the pilot seat. Then we've got another sidewall bit for the other side of the fuselage half, and a little tail cone piece, which has not got the hook because it's the non-navy version. Opening up here, we've got a fair few bits and pieces that make up the interior of the landing gear base, so there's even a fair bit of detail in there. As you can see, there's all these cross frames and wires and that sort of thing. Then you've got single piece elevators, which is pretty similar to the other ones we've seen, plus the tail cone, and then two halves for each wing section, which then attach to the fuselage. Then we've got a front engine cowling piece, similar to the other aircraft. And then we've got landing gear, which is a little bit more complicated. You've got two pieces, so a second strut, plus the landing gear flap, the tyres, and the main strut there. Got landing lights as separate pieces, and the clear part at the bottom, although I think on the British version it may have been fully covered over, so it wasn't, there was no observation windows, but not too sure. Then we've got the tail wheel here, which slots into the back. Separate pieces for the exhausts, just behind the engine cowling there. And then finally we've got the canopy in three sections, so you can have it open or closed. The little radio antenna at the front there. The roll bar, and it looks like they don't have the rounded sort of tank containing the life raft in this particular version. Then you've got the engine spinner at the front there. So there's again separate propeller blades, which I'm not a big fan of, but in fact, I don't know if they've actually got the same kind of lining up pins as the Hasegawa kit, so it might not even go together that well, which is a bit annoying, but it's probably done because they wanted to do several different versions of the Buffalo with the same tooling. Doesn't look like there's any piece for it to be held into the engine, so it looks like you don't have the option to have the propeller blade spin, which I think is a bit of a shame, but oh well, I'm sure you could rig it up if you wanted it that way. And then that's pretty much it for assembly. Then you've just got the marking guides. So it looks like we have three different marking schemes. We've got one from the Royal Australian Air Force from number 77 Squadron. And it's got a little bit of history about the aircraft and the pilot. Then we've got one from the Royal New Zealand Air Force. Again, another aircraft that was involved in the defence of Singapore. And this one is from Squadron 488. Then finally on the back here we've got another Royal Australian Air Force one actually. So this is 453 Squadron. So one from Singapore. And again a little bit of information. And they're Kai 43s I believe that are on the front cover there. As it mentions just up there. Yeah, interestingly all of these aircraft have the observation window at the bottom there. So perhaps it was standard on the British version of the Buffalo, which is interesting. So as I've mentioned, it is a single sprue with every single part on it. We might as well start off with the fuselage halves, which as you can see, standard is pretty much exactly the same as the Hasegawa kit. It's all recessed panel lines. They've done a nice job doing all of the hatch detailing. You can see the vents are molded into this one, and they're not quite as strong and defined as the Hasegawa kit, but they're not too bad. And you can see all of the recessed detailing for those bolts around the maintenance hatches. Bit of raised detailing for the ribbing on the fabric control surfaces, so looking pretty nice. And as you can see, you've got one of the tail cones, the shorter one, which I believe was more common with the Navy, already molded in, so I think you have to remove that if you want the longer tail cone piece. Here we've got one of the lower halves of the wings, again very similar to the Hasegawa one. You've got recessed panel lines and rivet detailing, recessed holes there for the ejector ports for the shells when they're spent, and then more access hatches on the underside there, looking pretty nice. Here we've got all the propeller blades, so you've got the later version which is a bit thicker and the shorter, narrower props there. You can see there's a fair bit of flashing on the edges and there's a few imperfections here and there, but nothing too major. Here we've got the bulkhead for the landing gear, and I don't think there's a fair bit of detail on one side, with a little bit of ribbing there by the looks of things and some structural details there. You can see there's a lot of smaller frame parts, which will be an absolute nightmare to cut off the sprue, but some pretty nice detailing there, plus a few landing gear struts there, which are quite nicely done as well. Here we've got the main landing gear strut with the part that attaches to the wheel, and then the large frame which the landing gear fairing flaps kind of go on. There's quite a large seam line on this part, as you can see there, which would require a fair bit of cleaning, but nothing too major. More small parts here, we've got the Navy version tail wheel, which is much smaller, and the larger land-based wheel. Looks like some more pitot tubes, a little bit of the antenna there, the rounded life raft canister for the Navy version with a fair bit of flashing in that corner there. A few little flaps here and there. Here we've got the elevators, which have a bit of raised detail on the fabric, but the rest is all recessed, including the little access hatches on the upper surface there, which look quite good. Here we've got one of the bulkheads for the engine, and they've done a really nice job molding radiator detail into this particular piece, which looks awesome. Nothing too much on the back there though. Got a nice looking little spinner there, which looks quite good. Here we've got the upper surfaces of the wing, again identical pretty much to the Hasegawa one in terms of the level of detail and a mix of recessed panel lines and rivets, plus the raised ribbing around the walkway area and the little pieces on the wing here, as well as a little bit of an attempt at the fabric texturing, but with raised panels. Some of the recessed details, like especially on the elevator there, are pretty poor. They're not very well molded, so you might have to rescore them with this particular kit. Here we've got what looks like the fuel tank, plus another little bulkhead kind of thing here. Another one here, which I believe is the one that goes at the rear. So there's quite a few little pieces with some nice little areas of detail, but there is a fair bit of flash that needs cleaning. Looks like these are your exhausts, and as you can see there's a fair bit of flashing on them, and they're not super detailed, but you could drill them out still. Here is the front of the engine cowling, and it's again similar to the Hasegawa kit. They've drilled out the holes for the intakes and the machine guns, which look quite nice. Optional cover for the observation window if you want it to be solid, and then that's the other longer tail cone piece. Interestingly, the only one side of the wings has the landing lights, where I believe on the Hasegawa one both sides had it, which is a little quirk there. But again, recessed details, which all look pretty nice. So you might notice that there's a few bits missing, especially for the inside of the fuselage half. There's no detailing there, but there is a bit of ribbing at the lower part there and where the tail wheel goes. And that is because a lot of the details come from the resin parts, which we'll have a look at here. Plus we've got the clear parts here. Again, similar to the Hasegawa and the Airfix kit, there's a few different canopy options, although it looks like you get a spare middle section, which is cool. Quality on these ones, yeah, probably quite similar to the Hasegawa ones. Again, with the observation window here, it's a little bit distorted, and there's a few errors because of the curvature on the parts that they've warped, and they're maybe a little bit thick, but otherwise, yeah, not too bad. They're pretty decent clear parts. There doesn't seem to be any scratches on them, although there is a fair bit of flashing in a lot of the corners that needs cleaning up. So as you can see, we have the floor with the rudder pedals and the control linkages for the joystick, which look quite nice there. Here we've got the sidewall details, which are wonderfully molded and very, very detailed. As you can see, they've got raised details as well as some recessed panels and yeah, it's just really, they've done a really nice job getting all the wiring and the tanks and just making it look like a crowded World War II kind of cockpit, and it all looks quite accurate for a Buffalo. You've got your throttles and your trim wheels and all your extra little dials on the side there. They all look really, really nice. A little bit of cleanup might be required. There's a fair bit of flash on these resin parts and they are a little bit warped, but honestly not too bad at all. Here we have the rudder pedals, which are pretty similarly detailed with quite a lot of little marks on them, as you can see there. They look really good. We've got a bit of the framework for the seat and the seat itself, which again, really nicely detailed parts there. You can see a little bit of ribbing on the seats and holes, and yeah, it just looks fantastic. Here we've got the tires, which are resin, so they're pretty similarly detailed to the Hasegawa ones, but they look quite nice as well. Here we've got the instrument panel, and as you can see, it's all recessed dials, which look really quite nice. I don't think there's any instrument panel decals. No, there's not. So you'll have to paint it by hand, which is a little bit of a pain, but hey, it won't look too bad at all, I reckon, once you do a good job of it. The engine here, which is done in resin, and as you can see, it's really fantastically detailed. Although again, it's probably quite similar to the Hasegawa one, really, in terms of the level of detail on all the cylinders and the wiring and that. And then the last few resin parts we have here are actually for the propeller assembly mainly, plus the joystick there. But as you can see, you've got a resin spinner base, so that's going to be a little bit tricky, I think, to get the propeller blades to line up on those parts there on the center of the hub there. And then looks like some really nice details that go behind the engine with some nice raised rivet details. Might be going in the landing gear bay area, which is quite open in this aircraft. So yeah, some really nice little resin detailed parts. And I won't open up the decals because technically this isn't mine. But as you can see, they're all pretty nicely done. The detail on them is quite good, especially on the artwork there. And you've got a few different markings. You've got a little dog, you've got looks like a kangaroo, and then you've got like a dragon thingy. So yeah, they all look quite nice. Not an awful lot of smaller stencils, but I don't think there were too many really on the Buffalo. So that's the Mark 1 from Special Hobby. Let's have a little look at the differences with the A3. So, as we can see on the box of the A3 Buffalo Defender of Midway, it's focused on the later versions of the aircraft, which were painted in the standard navy blues. And on the front here, we've got one flying past what must have been a very rare occasion where a Zero got shot down by one. And you can see it's a very heavily weathered looking aircraft, and it's sort of flying out over the water, which looks pretty awesome. And yeah, box is pretty similar layout to the Mark 1 with just the cover art and then a few little warnings and some details about what's included. And tooling is pretty much exactly the same. As you can see, we've got the exact same grey sprue here with all the parts in the exact same positions. Same thing with resin being the majority of the details, and all of the resin parts here are identical, as well as the clear sprues. And the decals that you get are obviously in this set for the US Navy, so you've got a few that are a bit more early with the red dots, and then the ones from Midway without the red circles painted over. So yeah, pretty nice looking kit. And as you can see with the instructions, they've changed the line drawing of the aircraft, and the description, I believe, is a bit more focused on the aircraft from the Battle of Midway. Instructions are pretty similar. They've changed which parts are not going to be used so that you make the US Navy version. As you can see, the main difference is the extra little tank here for the life raft, I believe it was, for the back here. The later models featured the extra fuel tank, which you are assembling here. And that was one of the big issues that pilots had. The weight was increased, but horsepower was not with the last version, so the performance was even worse. And that fuel tank, I believe, is part of the issue. Then again, assemblies are pretty much exactly the same. You've got the larger bladed paddles for the props here, and you've also got the scope for the Navy version. And otherwise, besides that and the tail wheel up there, it's pretty much identical to the Mark 1 assembly. And then you've got markings here, one from the Battle of Midway, and another one from Hawaii VMF 221, which I believe is the Marines. Plus, we've got one more here from Lexington, so one of the carriers. So yeah, some nice choices of scheme here, and I believe Special Hobby have reissued this kit with several different versions, including some of the later Royal Australian Air Force ones that were used after the Battle of Singapore that somehow managed to survive that long. So yeah, as you can see, a fantastically detailed kit, even though it's obviously not quite as cleanly moulded as the Hasegawa one with a bit more flash. It's the kind of kit where you put a bit of work into it and you can get a really fantastic result. So, which of these three is the best? And well, to be honest, just like whether or not the real Buffalo was the worst fighter of World War II, it's a bit tricky to say whether or not one of these kits is the best. To be honest, I think they're good for different reasons. If you want a really, really detailed kit, the Special Hobby is the one for you. It's got some fantastic details, and even though it does require a little bit of fiddling around with resin parts, and it looks like a few parts may need a bit of cleanup, and it's a bit expensive. I've seen them go for around about $40 brand new, but I think it varies, and I haven't honestly checked in recent times. So if you want something really detailed, that's probably the best. If you want something that's kind of middle ground, it's got some good details, but it's also not all out, then the Hasegawa one is pretty good. Hasegawa have also reissued it with a lot of different decals, so you can get the good finish version. And as for the Airfix one, it's nostalgic, which is nice. I'm sure a lot of people who watch my videos have also built one back in the day, and honestly, it just looks like a pretty easy build, although there is a lot of flash, so that is a bit of a pain. If you were a beginner, which well, I'm a bit surprised a beginner doing a Buffalo would be a little bit unusual. You're a cut above the rest for not building a Spitfire or 109 or something really generic like that. Honestly, I'd say Hasegawa is probably best because it's pretty detailed, but also looks like it's better engineered and has less flash than the Airfix one. But if you want the Airfix one, it's a little bit cheaper, and it also seems to be a lot more available than all of these ones. I've seen it for around about $25, so yeah, that seems relatively reasonable. Maybe it should be a little bit less because there's no cockpit detailing, really. But oh well, Airfix do seem to be getting more and more expensive in Australia, which is a bit of a shame. As I've said, I've finished the Airfix one, so there'll be a video coming on that pretty soon. The Hasegawa one, I've actually got to start. It's right there, but I'll get there eventually. I'm sort of just deciding whether or not I do a silver navy one, or perhaps I try and find some questionable decals that I probably can't show on YouTube and make a finish one. But thank you very much for watching this one. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to leave a like. And if you have any questions or suggestions for stuff in the future, leave it down in the comment section below. Big shout out, as always, to my wonderful patrons for helping me fund buying these kits. There'll be build videos coming on these for the Airfix one definitely quite soon, the Hasegawa one a little bit further off. Still working on a lot of other projects, including more 109s and that sort of thing. And also with the Milne Bay project, I've got, as you can see, this shelf right here of Doom. Is projects that I need to finish before I start filming for it, and the script is about halfway done, so expect to see some videos on these in the not too distant future as well. But thanks again, and as always, take care and model on.